While my brother received $75 million and the keys to a mansion at our father's funeral, I stood in the corner with empty pockets and a heart full of questions. "Sorry, Alex, your father made his choices clear," the lawyer said with a pitying smile. 8 months later, that same lawyer was begging for mercy as I revealed the truth. My name is James Blackwood, and I was erased from my family's legacy until a stranger handed me an envelope containing $400 million and the DNA test that would destroy everything my brother thought he knew. My real father had been planning this for 20 years. I used to wake up at 5:45 a.m. every day in my modest two-bedroom apartment in Chicago's Lincoln Park. Not the fancy high-rises with doormen, but the converted older buildings where you could still find teachers and nurses as neighbors. I'd brew coffee in the same chipped blue mug my father gave me when I graduated college, Columbia, journalism major, class of 2016. By 6:30, I'd be at my desk at the Tribune, where I'd worked my way up to investigative reporter over 8 years of 60-hour weeks and cold pizza dinners. My specialty was financial corruption. The irony doesn't escape me now. I developed a reputation for following money trails that powerful people wanted hidden, for finding the human stories behind corporate malfeasance. My editor, Rita Chaudhry, called me the Bloodhound, because once I caught a scent of wrongdoing, I wouldn't let go until I had the full story. My desk was organized chaos, notebooks color-coded by investigation, post-its with contact information, and photographs of people affected by the crimes I was investigating. My father, Edward Blackwood, was the chairman of Blackwood Financial Group, with offices in Chicago, New York, and London. We weren't close in the traditional sense, birthdays and holidays only, with the occasional Sunday dinner when his schedule allowed, but there was mutual respect. He'd once told me he admired my choice to make my own way rather than join the family business like my older brother, Richard. "Integrity is the Blackwood legacy," he'd say, quoting his own father. "Money comes and goes, but your name is forever." Richard, 3 years my senior, was everything I wasn't: polished, political, a natural in boardrooms. He'd attended Wharton, married Melissa, daughter of a senator, and had 2 perfect children who attended the same private school where we'd gone. Sunday dinners at his Gold Coast mansion were exercises in restraint as I endured subtle jabs about my charming apartment and noble career choice. "Still chasing down leads for that little paper, Jimmy?" Richard would ask, swirling 20-year-old scotch in a crystal tumbler. "You know there's always a place for you at the firm. Entry level, of course." The smirk never reached his eyes. My father would change the subject, asking about my latest investigation. In retrospect, I should have noticed how he'd grown thinner that winter, how his once commanding presence had diminished. But I was deep into an investigation about pharmaceutical price manipulation. I was busy. That's what I tell myself now. I first noticed something was off in March. My weekly calls with Dad became shorter, often interrupted by meetings he suddenly remembered. Twice his assistant Margaret answered, saying he was indisposed. Margaret, who'd worked for my father for 25 years, couldn't meet my eyes at the annual company Christmas party. "Your brother has been spending a lot of time with your father," she said, looking over my shoulder. "Medical consultations, I believe." "Medical? Is Dad sick?" I asked, alarm rising in my chest. "You should speak with Richard," she replied, then excused herself. Richard, of course, dismissed my concerns. "Dad's fine, just annual checkups. You'd know if you were around more." In April, I received a text from Dad asking to meet at Gibson's Steakhouse, our traditional spot for rare father-son dinners. I arrived early, ordered his usual Manhattan, and waited. When he entered, I barely recognized him, 20 pounds lighter, gray complexion, but still in an impeccably tailored suit. "James," he said, his handshake weaker than I remembered. "Thank you for making time." "Dad, what's going on? You look—" "I've had better days," he interrupted with a small smile. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The Manhattan untouched between us, I struggled to process his words. Treatment options? Buying time, not cures, he said, with the same pragmatism he applied to business decisions. 6 months, perhaps a year with aggressive treatment. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why did I have to hear from Margaret that something was wrong? Richard thought it best to wait until we had a clear prognosis, he said, eyes on his water glass. He's been managing things admirably. Arrangements for the company, for the family. Arrangements? My voice caught. Dad, I'm a reporter. I research things for a living. I could have helped find specialists, treatment options. James, he said, voice firming momentarily. It's handled. Richard has connections at Mayo, at Sloan Kettering. Everything possible is being done. We ate dinner in stilted conversation, him picking at his steak, me unable to taste anything. As we waited for the check, he slid an envelope across the table. I want you to have this now, he said. It's the deed to the lake house in Michigan. I know how much you loved it as a boy. Richard never cared for it, too rustic for his taste. The lake house, 4 bedrooms on Lake Michigan where I'd spent summers fishing with my grandfather, where Dad had taught me to sail. It was worth maybe $500,000, nothing compared to the Blackwood fortune, but it was the one place where I had uncomplicated happy memories. Dad, I don't want inheritance discussions. I want to talk about second opinions, about, it's done, James. The house is yours, free and clear. The rest, he trailed off, looking suddenly tired. The rest is more complicated. Richard has specific ideas about the Blackwood legacy. 2 months later, Dad was moved to home hospice care at Richard's mansion. I visited daily, taking time off work despite Rita's concerns about an upcoming deadline. Each day, I'd arrive to find Richard and Melissa in deep conversation with a rotating cast of lawyers, financial advisors, and men in expensive suits I didn't recognize. Conversations would stop when I entered. I'd be directed to Dad's room, where he slept more and spoke less. The house staff gave me pitying looks. Richard's children were kept away to preserve their memories of grandfather, Melissa explained with practiced sympathy. On what would be my last visit before my father's death, I arrived to find Dr. Winters, Dad's primary physician, leaving Richard's study. "How is he?" I asked. "Comfortable," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Your brother has arranged for excellent care." When I entered Dad's room, he was awake but distant, his gaze fixed on the window overlooking Lake Michigan. "Dad," I said, taking his thin hand, "it's Jimmy." His eyes cleared momentarily. "James," he whispered, "the envelope. Check the inside pocket." "The lake house deed? I have it, Dad. Thank you." He shook his head weakly, frustration crossing his features. "No, Margaret has." His voice faded as Richard entered. "Jimmy, Dr. Winters says we shouldn't tire him," Richard said, his hand firm on my shoulder. "Say goodbye for today." I leaned down, kissed my father's forehead, and whispered, "I'll be back tomorrow." It was the last time I saw him alive. The call came at 3 a.m. Edward Blackwood had passed peacefully in his sleep. The funeral was held at St. Chrysostom's Episcopal Church, where generations of Blackwoods had been baptized, married, and mourned. I sat in the front pew, numb, as Richard delivered a polished eulogy about my father's business acumen and philanthropic legacy. "My father entrusted me with continuing the Blackwood tradition of excellence," Richard said, voice steady despite the occasion. "A responsibility I accept with humility and determination." The reception at Richard's mansion was a who's who of Chicago's elite. While I stood awkwardly with a glass of water, I'd sworn off alcohol since Dad's diagnosis, Richard worked the room, accepting condolences with the smooth grace of a politician. I overheard fragments of conversation: succession plans, merger possibilities, valuation of holdings. At 4 p.m. sharp, Lawrence Pritchard, the family attorney, gathered the immediate family in Richard's wood-paneled study for the reading of the will. Just Richard, Melissa, and me. No Margaret, which I found strange, as she'd been practically family. "Before I begin," Pritchard said, adjusting his glasses, "I want to express my personal condolences. Edward was not just a client, but a friend of 30 years. Richard nodded solemnly. "Thank you, Lawrence. Please proceed." The will was brutally simple. Richard inherited controlling interest in Blackwood Financial Group, valued at approximately $350 million. He also received the family estate in Lake Forest, $15 million, vacation properties in Aspen and the Hamptons, $7 million combined, Dad's art collection, $12 million, and various investment portfolios, $25 million. The Family Philanthropic Foundation, $85 million, would be directed by Richard and Melissa. And me? The lake house deed already in my possession, and a nominal sum of $50,000, in recognition of James's desire for independence and his commendable self-sufficiency, Pritchard read without inflection. "There must be some mistake," I said, voice hollow. Pritchard looked uncomfortable but firm. "The will was revised 6 months ago, with Edward of sound mind and 2 witnesses present. It's legally binding." Richard placed a hand on my shoulder. "Jimmy, Dad respected your journalistic integrity. He knew you wouldn't want to be encumbered by wealth you didn't earn." His tone was compassionate, his eyes cold. "The lake house is worth a good sum. You could sell it if you need capital." Melissa handed me a tissue I hadn't realized I needed. "Family dinners won't change, James. You'll always be welcome here." That night, alone in my apartment, I called Margaret repeatedly, voicemail each time. I emailed her. Nothing. 3 days later, I discovered she'd retired with a generous package the day after my father's death and moved to Arizona. A week after the funeral, I returned to work, throwing myself into my investigation. But I couldn't focus. The story, exposing price gouging by a pharmaceutical company, felt meaningless compared to the questions haunting me. 2 weeks later, I was called into Rita's office. "James," she said, her usual directness tempered with unusual gentleness, "your last 3 submissions needed complete rewrites. You've missed 2 editorial meetings. What's going on?" "My father just died," I said flatly. "I know, and I'm deeply sorry, but it's been nearly a month, and—" She hesitated. "We're facing budget cuts. Corporate is demanding a 15% reduction in staff." I knew what was coming. Last in, first out wasn't the official policy, but I was far from indispensable. "Take 2-month severance," Rita said, pushing an envelope across her desk, just like Dad had with the lake house deed. "Get yourself together. I'll write you a glowing recommendation." That night, I sat on my balcony with the Manhattan I'd finally allowed myself, watching the Chicago skyline blur. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "Heard about the Tribune. Tough break. Offer to join the firm still stands. Entry level. Think about it." I threw the phone against the wall. The next month dissolved in a spiral of loss. Rent in Lincoln Park, even in my modest building, was unsustainable without income. I sold my car, Honda Accord 2018, $13,000, then my grandfather's watch, $4,200. I interviewed at the Sun-Times, at digital media startups, even at PR firms. No one was hiring investigative journalists in a dying industry. By month 3, I had moved to a studio apartment in Uptown, my possessions reduced to what would fit in the back of an Uber. The lake house remained my one asset, but I couldn't bring myself to sell it. It was my last connection to Dad, to the man who'd taught me about integrity. I started freelancing, picking up pieces for online outlets at $200 an article. I wrote about restaurant openings, neighborhood gentrification, profiles of local business owners, a far cry from exposing corruption, but it kept the lights on. Barely. Then came the email from Pritchard's office. Due to administrative oversight, Property taxes on the lake house hadn't been paid in 3 years, predating Dad's death. The bill was $27,400, due in 30 days, or the property would enter foreclosure. I called Richard, swallowing my pride. "It's an unfortunate situation," he said, his voice echoing as if on speakerphone in his large office. "But really, Jimmy, the property taxes should have been obvious. Dad always maintained his affairs meticulously. Can you loan me the money? I'll pay you back once I'm on my feet." A pause. "The thing is, if you can't afford the taxes, you can't afford the upkeep. The responsible thing would be to sell to someone who can preserve the property properly." Another pause. "I could have our real estate division handle it. We'd take a reduced commission, of course." I hung up without answering. That Friday, I met my old college roommate Keith for happy hour at a dive bar in Wicker Park. He'd gotten wind of my situation and insisted on buying the drinks. "Stay with us," he offered after hearing the full story. "The pull-out couch is yours until you figure things out." "I can't impose on you and Sarah," I protested, though my alternatives were dwindling. "You've got the baby coming in, 2 months? All the more reason. We could use the help," he grinned, though we both knew a newborn and an unemployed houseguest were a terrible combination. Walking home that night, I'd started walking everywhere to save on transit, I passed Blackwood Plaza, the gleaming downtown headquarters of my family's company. Through the massive glass atrium, I could see a banner hanging in the lobby, celebrating 75 years of Blackwood excellence, a legacy continues. I stood there in my worn shoes, the same suit I'd worn to my father's funeral now loose on my frame, and watched as the lights turned off floor by floor. The cleaning staff emerged eventually, mainly older women hunched with exhaustion. Their faces reminding me of the people I used to write about, the ones affected by corporate greed. One woman noticed me staring and hesitated. "You need something, sir?" I shook my head, embarrassed. "No, sorry, just passing by." She studied my face. "You look like the old man in the pictures inside." I swallowed hard. He was my father. Her expression softened with recognition. "You're the other son, the one who writes for the papers." She reached into her purse and pressed a business card into my hand. "My nephew Jeremiah runs a shelter on the south side. They need people who can help with paperwork, letters for the residents. Pays a little, not much, but something. If this story is touching your heart, please like and subscribe to our channel. In the comments, share if you've ever experienced betrayal or injustice. Let's create a community of support." I was helping Jeremiah sort donation receipts at the Southside Community Center when the well-dressed woman walked in. The shelter had become my second home over the past 3 months. The part-time work Jeremiah offered, managing paperwork for housing applications, drafting appeal letters for benefits, paid just $15 an hour, but it was enough to cover the room I rented from another shelter volunteer. The woman looked out of place in her tailored navy suit and pearl earrings, clutching a leather portfolio like it contained state secrets. Her eyes scanned the room, passing over the residents having lunch before landing on me. "Mr. Blackwood? James Blackwood?" she asked, approaching my folding table. I tensed. No one here knew my last name. I'd introduced myself as just James, avoiding questions about the Blackwood connection. "Who's asking?" I replied. "My name is Eleanor Winters, with the firm of Winters, Zhao & Associates." She held out a business card. The embossed text indicated a law firm I'd never heard of. "I need to speak with you privately. It's regarding your father." "My father died 7 months ago," I said flatly. "If Richard sent you—" "I don't represent your brother," she interrupted. "Please, 15 minutes of your time. It's important." Jeremiah nodded at me from across the room, silently offering his cramped office. Once inside, Miss Winters placed her portfolio on the desk and removed a sealed envelope. 6 days before Edward Blackwood's death, this was entrusted to our firm with explicit instructions, she explained, sliding the envelope toward me. We were to wait exactly 7 months after his passing before delivering it to you, and only you. I stared at the envelope. My name was written in my father's distinctive handwriting. This makes no sense. Why not include it in the will? Why 7 months? Those were your father's instructions, she said simply. The envelope is yours regardless of whether you open it now or later. My hands trembled slightly as I broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter and a small USB drive. "Dear James," I read aloud, my father's voice somehow present in the small office. "If you're reading this, then the worst has happened. Not just my death, but the betrayal I feared. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you directly. They were watching too closely." I looked up at Eleanor Winters, who sat impassively. "What is this?" "Continue reading," she said. The cancer diagnosis was real, but what followed was not. Richard made arrangements to control my care, my medications, my access to family and colleagues. I suspect my illness progressively became accelerated. I have no proof, but the timing was convenient for certain business arrangements. What you need to know: I never revised my will. The document presented by Lawrence Pritchard is fraudulent. Richard knew I planned to split Blackwood Financial between you both. Your integrity was precisely what the company needed as counterbalance to his ambition. On the USB drive, you'll find the real will, notarized and witnessed, along with financial records showing unusual movements of funds in my last months, communications between Richard and Pritchard, and medical records suggesting medication irregularities. Most importantly, there is a DNA test. James, this will be shocking, but it's necessary you know. Richard is not my biological son. I stopped reading, my breath caught. This can't be real. Eleanor Winters leaned forward. Your father hired our firm, specifically me, because we have no connections to Blackwood Financial. He was extremely paranoid in his final months, perhaps with good reason. I returned to the letter. The truth. Before I married your mother, she had a brief relationship with Marcus Chamberlain, my business partner at the time. Richard was already conceived. She told me after we were engaged, and I chose to raise him as my own. No one else ever knew, until I confronted him with this fact during a particularly aggressive treatment planning session. His reaction confirmed my suspicions about his intentions. There's more. Marcus Chamberlain didn't just disappear to pursue other opportunities, as the company history states. I bought him out because he had developed a revolutionary financial algorithm that Blackwood Financial still uses today. The proprietary rights, outlined in our original agreement, revert to his heirs upon discovery of any genetic offspring. You, James, are my only biological child, and the true heir to not just Blackwood Financial, but to the entire Chamberlain intellectual property portfolio, currently valued at approximately $400 million, separate from the company itself. Eleanor Winters is not just my attorney, but my friend from law school. She has all necessary documentation and a team of forensic accountants and medical experts ready to move at your command. The Michigan Lake House has a safe beneath the floorboards in the master bedroom, combination 11-24-63, my father's birthday. Inside are additional documents, including Margaret's sworn statement. I'm sorry to place this burden on you, son, but you are the one who can set things right. With love and faith in your judgment, Edward Blackwood. The office was silent as I processed the letter's contents. Eleanor waited patiently before speaking. We've prepared 2 options, she said, opening her portfolio. Option 1 is aggressive. We filed charges of fraud, will tampering, potential medical malfeasance, and immediately claimed the Chamberlain intellectual property rights. The company's stock would likely plummet when this becomes public, but your claim would be maximized. And option 2, a private settlement. We approach Richard with evidence but offer a non-disclosure agreement. He retains control of Blackwood Financial but acknowledges your ownership of the Chamberlain portfolio and pays restitution for the fraudulent will. The company remains stable, your inheritance is secured, and Richard avoids potential criminal charges. I looked down at my father's handwriting, then at the USB drive that could destroy or save the Blackwood legacy. "How quickly can we get to the lake house?" I asked. 2 days later, Margaret's sworn statement lay on the kitchen table of the lake house, alongside medical records showing progressive increases in my father's morphine dosage beyond prescribed levels, and email exchanges between Richard and Pritchard discussing contingencies should I contest the will. "Your father was very thorough," Eleanor said as we cataloged the evidence. "He even recorded conversations with Richard during his final weeks. The audio quality isn't perfect, but the content is illuminating." We listened to my father's weakened voice asking about changes to his medication, followed by Richard's smooth reassurances that everything is being handled according to your wishes. "When did you last speak with Margaret?" I asked Eleanor. "Last week. She's prepared to testify if necessary. She's been receiving payments from Richard to stay quiet, which she's documented." I walked to the window overlooking Lake Michigan, the same view my father had loved. The family photos on the mantel showed a history built on what I now knew was a complicated foundation of both lies and love. "How soon can we move on this?" I asked. "Immediately," Eleanor replied. "The team is standing by. But James, I need to know which option you're choosing, aggressive public action or private settlement." I picked up a photograph of my father and me sailing on this very lake 15 years ago, his hand steady on the tiller, teaching me to read the wind. "Neither," I said, an idea forming. "I want a third option." This twist surprised you? Wait until you see what happens next. Share this video with someone who needs to believe that life can turn around completely. The following week, I walked into the gleaming lobby of Blackwood Plaza wearing a suit Eleanor had insisted on having tailored for me. "Appearance matters in these situations," she'd said, adjusting my tie. Now, as the security guard checked his list for my name, I could feel the weight of the USB drive in my pocket. "Mr. Blackwood," the guard said, finding my name, "you're expected on the 40th floor. Mr. Richard Blackwood's executive assistant will meet you at the elevator." The executive floor hadn't changed since my childhood visits. The same austere elegance, glass-enclosed offices, and hushed conversations. Family photographs lined Richard's outer office wall. Richard with the mayor, with senators, with his perfect family. None with me. "James," Richard said, emerging from his office with practiced warmth, "this is a pleasant surprise. Finally reconsidering my offer?" He gestured for me to enter his corner office with its panoramic view of Chicago. "Actually," I said, taking a seat across from his imposing desk, "I'm here about Dad's will." His smile tightened slightly. "I thought we settled that matter months ago. Lawrence explained everything." "Lawrence Pritchard has resigned as counsel for Blackwood Financial," I said, calmly, "effective yesterday." Richard's expression flickered briefly before resuming its mask of concern. "That's unfortunate timing. We're in the middle of several important transactions." "I know. The Meridian merger, the Singapore expansion, the offshore accounts in the Caymans that don't appear on the company books." I placed a folder on his desk. "The irregular medications administered during Dad's final weeks." All pretense of warmth vanished from Richard's face. "Where did you get this information?" "Dad was thorough, just like you taught me a Blackwood should be." Richard leaned back, his calculating mind visible behind his eyes. "What do you want, Jimmy? Money? A position in the company? I can arrange something suitable. I want the truth, starting with Marcus Chamberlain." The name hit Richard like a physical blow. He stood abruptly, walking to the window. "Dad told you," he said finally, "among other things, like the fact that his actual will split the company evenly between us." Richard turned, his face now cold. "Do you have any idea what it's like to give everything to this company, to this family name, only to discover it was never really yours?" His voice rose slightly. "I built this, James. While you were playing reporter, I was here, 18 hours a day, making Blackwood what it is. By drugging our father and falsifying his will, I made necessary adjustments to protect what matters." Richard slammed his hand on the desk. "You would have destroyed it all with your journalistic integrity and ethical concerns." "You're right about one thing," I said, standing to meet his gaze. "I do have concerns about running a company built on fraud." I pressed a button on my phone, and Eleanor entered with two men I recognized as board members of Blackwood Financial. "Richard," I said, as he paled visibly, "meet Harold Chen and Walter Montgomery from the board. They've just been reviewing Dad's actual will and the Chamberlain intellectual property agreements." Harold Chen, 70 and imposing despite his small stature, fixed Richard with a stare. "We've known your father, Edward, since before you were born, Richard. This information is disturbing." "This is absurd," Richard sputtered. "Whatever James has told you." "We've seen the evidence," Walter Montgomery interrupted. "The board has called an emergency session for tomorrow morning." His gray eyebrows drew together. "Until then, you are suspended from all duties pending review." Richard's assistant appeared at the door. "Sir, there are officers here from the Financial Crimes Division." The next hour unfolded in a blur of legal terminology and procedural explanations. Richard was not arrested, not yet, but the investigation had officially begun. As he was escorted from his office, he turned to me. "You have no idea what you've done," he hissed. "You can't run this company. You'll destroy everything." "You're right," I replied. "I can't run it, not alone." The press conference was Eleanor's idea, but the words were mine. Standing in the atrium of Blackwood Plaza 3 days later, I faced a room of business reporters, including former colleagues from the Tribune. Blackwood Financial Group was founded on principles of integrity and service, I began. In recent years, those principles were compromised. As the son of Edward Blackwood and the current majority shareholder, I am announcing 3 immediate changes. The cameras flashed as I outlined the new direction. First, the appointment of a new executive board, including Margaret, now returned from her retirement, and Harold Chen as co-chairs. Second, a full investigation into all financial irregularities under Richard's leadership. And third, the establishment of the Blackwood Journalism Fund, endowed with $50 million to support investigative reporting focused on corporate accountability. Finally, I concluded, I am announcing the creation of the Chamberlain Technology Initiative, which will make the proprietary financial algorithms developed by Marcus Chamberlain available as open-source tools for financial literacy education in underserved communities. Afterward, Rita found me in the crowd. "Quite a story, Blackwood," she said, with a hint of her old directness. "If you ever want to write it up, I know an editor who'd be interested." I smiled. "I might take you up on that, after the legal dust settles." As the crowd dispersed, I spotted Jeremiah standing awkwardly in his worn jacket. "You didn't have to come," I said, genuinely touched. "Wanted to make sure you remember where you came from," he replied with a small smile. "The shelter still needs help with those housing applications, you know? People still need someone who can write a good letter." "I'll be there tomorrow," I promised. "Some things are more important than board meetings." That evening, I returned to the lake house, my lake house, truly mine now. I sat on the dock where Dad and I had fished, watching the sunset turn the water golden. My phone had been ringing all day with congratulations, interview requests, and investment opportunities. I'd turned it off. Melissa had called earlier, tearfully explaining she'd known nothing about Richard's actions, asking if I would still be Uncle Jimmy to the children. I'd assured her some relationships were beyond the reach of legal battles. In my pocket was a letter from Margaret, sharing memories of my father that Richard had never cared to hear, promises to help guide me through the company politics, and her pride in what I'd done. "Your father would say you honored the true Blackwood legacy," she'd written. I skipped a stone across the still water, watching the ripples spread. Tomorrow would bring more challenges. The board meeting, Richard's pending criminal charges, my own steep learning curve about a business I'd deliberately avoided. But tonight, for the first time in nearly a year, I could breathe freely. 18 months later, I stand at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Southside Financial Literacy Center, the first of 12 such centers funded by the Chamberlain Initiative. Jeremiah is beside me, now the paid director of community outreach for the foundation, looking only slightly uncomfortable in his new suit. "Speech time," he mutters, nudging me toward the podium. The journey from that day in Richard's office to this moment has been neither straight nor simple. Richard ultimately accepted a plea agreement, 5 years for financial fraud and elder abuse, with the possibility of parole in 3. The medications charge was the most difficult to prove, though the evidence was compelling. I visit him monthly at the minimum security facility in Wisconsin. Our conversations are strained but necessary for both of us. Blackwood Financial has been transformed under the new leadership. Margaret retired properly this time, but not before mentoring me through 6 months of intensive corporate education. Harold Chen continues as chairman, bringing both stability and innovation. Our client base initially contracted by 17% when the scandal broke, but has since grown by 32% as our new transparency practices attract ethically minded investors. Melissa and I have developed an unlikely friendship. Her divorce from Richard was finalized last spring, and she now runs the Blackwood Foundation with remarkable skill. The children, my niece and nephew, regardless of biology, spend weekends with me at the lake house during summer months, learning to sail as I once did. The most surprising development was discovering 3 other Chamberlain descendants through DNA registries, cousins I never knew existed, now partners in directing the algorithm's applications for public benefit. Together, we've established scholarship programs at 5 universities and funded research into ethical applications of financial technology. The Tribune rehired me, not as a reporter, but as a contributing editor for a special series on corporate ethics, allowing me to work part-time while managing my new responsibilities. Rita jokes that I've gone from bloodhound to watchdog, but respects the unique perspective I bring. Today marks not just the opening of a building, I begin my speech, looking out at the gathered community members, reporters, and financial education advocates, but the continuation of a legacy that almost got lost. I explain how financial literacy tools previously available only to the wealthiest investors will now serve communities systematically excluded from economic opportunity. How the same algorithms once used to maximize profit will help families build generational wealth through smarter saving and investing. My father believed that integrity was the true Blackwood legacy, I continue. But I've learned that legacy isn't something you inherit. It's something you build choice by choice, day by day. After the ceremony, I chat with the first group of community financial counselors being trained at the center. They range from former bank tellers to community college students, all passionate about bringing financial empowerment back to their neighborhoods. "Mr. Blackwood," one young woman approaches, "I just wanted to say, my grandfather lost his pension during the 2008 crisis. If he'd had something like this," she trails off, emotion in her voice. "What's your name?" I ask. "Zoe Washington," she replies. "I'm studying finance at Malcolm X College." Well, Zoe Washington, we can't change the past, but we can certainly reshape the future. That's what all this is about. Later that evening, I meet Keith and Sarah for dinner at a restaurant near their home. Their daughter, my goddaughter Edith, now almost 2, immediately demands to be picked up when she sees me. I oblige, settling her on my hip as we catch up. "The center looks amazing," Keith says. "Saw it on the news." "You could have been there in person if you hadn't been so stubborn about taking the job," I reply with a smile. Keith had initially refused my offer to lead the Chamberlain Initiative's educational program, insisting it would feel like charity. He finally accepted 6 months ago, after I convinced him his background in educational technology made him uniquely qualified. "Still feels weird sometimes," Keith admits, watching Edith play with my watch. "Working for my old roommate who used to borrow my meal card." Keith laughs. "Keith was so proud when you insisted on making him interview with the full board instead of just appointing him." "The board would have had my head if I'd started handing out jobs to friends," I say. "Though I'll admit, I was pretty confident you'd get it." As we eat, I find myself watching the family across from us. Parents with 3 children, clearly celebrating something special given their dressed-up appearance but careful ordering. I recognize the calculations in the father's eyes as he studies the menu prices, the mother's gentle suggestion to the kids to share dessert. Without drawing attention, I signal our server and quietly arrange to cover their bill. It's a small gesture, one of dozens I've made since coming into wealth I never sought. Not out of grandiose philanthropy, but from remembering how it felt to count every dollar, to exist on the margins when you once belonged. After dinner, I decline Keith and Sarah's invitation to join them for coffee at their home. "Early meeting tomorrow with the Singapore office," I explain, hugging them goodbye. The truth is simpler. Some nights I need solitude to process how dramatically life has changed. I drive to the lake house instead of my downtown condo, preferring its quiet authenticity to sleek luxury. Sitting on the dock under stars that seem brighter here than in the city, I reflect on what my father might think of the choices I've made. Keeping majority ownership of Blackwood Financial while installing qualified leadership. Making the Chamberlain algorithms public rather than exclusive. Maintaining my journalistic connections rather than becoming solely a businessman. I've learned that inheritances come in many forms. Richard inherited ambition and cunning, whether from biology or environment remains debatable. I inherited my father's moral compass, his belief that wealth brings responsibility rather than just privilege. But the most valuable inheritance wasn't money or property or even the family name. It was the ability to see beyond myself, to recognize the invisible threads connecting people across circumstance and status. The Lake House guest room now permanently houses a rotating roster of residents from Jeremiah's shelter, people transitioning from homelessness to stability, needing temporary peace while rebuilding their lives. My financial advisors were horrified at the insurance implications, but some decisions aren't about risk management. The woman who initially directed me to Jeremiah's shelter, Constance is her name, now supervises housekeeping services at all 12 literacy centers, employing people with barriers to traditional employment. She still cleans the Blackwood Plaza offices, but now as the owner of her own company, contracted at fair market rates. I'm not the same person who stood stunned in Richard's office that day. Nor am I the bitter young man who watched his family legacy seemingly stolen. I'm something in between, part journalist, part businessman, part accidental philanthropist. The duality that once felt like weakness has become strength. I can move between worlds and build bridges across them. My phone buzzes with a text from Eleanor, now both legal counsel and friend. Board presentation ready for review. Also, Richard's parole hearing scheduled for next month. Will you attend? I consider the question, watching moonlight glint on gentle waves. The anger that once burned so hot has cooled, not into forgiveness exactly, but into something like understanding. Richard's choices were wrong, criminal even, but not incomprehensible. Fear of losing what defines you can drive terrible decisions. Yes, I text back, I'll be there. Tomorrow brings another day of balancing corporate responsibilities with community commitments, of navigating between privilege and purpose. The juggling act isn't perfect. I've missed journalism deadlines, disappointed board members, and forgotten promised calls to Melissa's children. But each misstep is a chance to realign with what matters. The legacy my father wanted to protect wasn't buildings or bank accounts or even the family name on corporate letterhead. It was the understanding that wealth without conscience becomes poison, that power without purpose corrupts its wielder. I pick up a smooth stone from the shore and skip it across the water's surface. 1, 2, 3, 4 jumps before it disappears beneath the dark surface. Like ripples from that stone, the effects of our choices extend far beyond our sight, touching lives we may never know. The true inheritance isn't what's given to you, but what you choose to do with what you've received. My father knew that. In his final act, that hidden envelope, those carefully preserved records, he wasn't just protecting me or exposing Richard. He was preserving the possibility that something broken could be rebuilt better than before. And isn't that the real legacy worth protecting? Not wealth or status or power, but the chance to transform what was damaged into something healing, to take what was meant for harm and reshape it into hope. I walk back to the lake house, to the room where my father once taught me to tie fishing knots with endless patience, where now a former accountant who lost everything to addiction sleeps safely while rebuilding his life. Different lives, same space, connected by the simple belief that everyone deserves a second chance. This, I think, is what Dad would have wanted. Not just justice, but redemption. Not just restoration, but transformation. The Blackwood legacy, redefined not by what we possess, but by what we make possible for others. If this story touched your soul, if you believe justice exists and that we can rise from the ashes, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Share your own story of overcoming adversity in the comments. Let's support each other. Share this video with someone going through a difficult time. Remember, your story isn't over yet, and the best chapters may still be ahead. The 2 incredible stories appearing on your screen now, choose one to continue this journey of hope. Until the next video, may you find your own victorious turning point. God bless you.